Hey guys, so today we're going to be talking about the time periods of literary movements and just giving you a general timeline. I will go back and look at these in more detail later, but this is just a general overview. So if you want to have a look at the specific literary movements and what they're all about, then I'm going to be giving a more in-depth look at each individual one in this series, but this is the beginning of this series, so I'm just going to go through a general overview. So we're going to start looking at it from ancient Greece. Now that was a lot of classicism, so a lot of stuff devoted to the gods, Euripides and Aeschylus. I know a lot about the playwrights and the plays, but I'll be less looking at like Plato and Socrates and those kind of philosophers because I feel like that's a bit big for me to tackle at the moment. So we're not so much going to focus on classicism in the early forms because I'm looking at more contemporary stuff, but of course it's always a good point of reference and I'll totally make a video about it, but later down the track rather than right now. So after that, then we had the Dark Ages, Black Death, that kind of stuff. And then we got into the Renaissance, which was the 16th, 17th century. Now I'm mostly focusing on England for the time periods and such, just because we are doing English literature. And while I'm really fascinated by Italian stuff, and you find those that they have influences like on the work of English writers, like Shakespeare had a lot of work from Commedia dell'arte, that kind of stuff. I will be later on looking at Australia and American literature as well as English, but right now, going back in the time periods, it's easier to focus on English because otherwise we start like being like, oh, but in this country it was a bit later and blah, blah. So the Renaissance means, like the term Renaissance means rebirth. Poetry of the time was usually intended to be set to music. Not all of it, but a lot of it. That's where we get our Shakespeare. So that's obviously a big thing. We get a good example of that is The Fairy Queen by Edmund Spenser. But I will be looking at more Shakespearean stuff when we come to it, just because I feel like you can't really ignore that. That's really important. I like The Tempest, so we'll probably be looking at that, but I'm open to any suggestions, and not even just Shakespeare, like any suggestions for anything that you want me to look at, any texts or any books or any poetry. And then we go into the Enlightenment time period. So this is like really like where the science started to come in, and more away from the religious side of things and looking more into science. So reason, scientific thought, like reason over emotion was a lot of the emphasis in that, and that was the late 17th and 18th centuries. Then you come to neoclassical literature, which is written between 1660 and 1790s, like around there. And so that was like tried to imitate the style of the Romans and the Greeks, so the classical time period, like the classical literature and the classical artwork and all that stuff. And we find that all of the arts often tie together, so we have a lot of stuff, like, and I'll be using a lot of my examples will be art based, just because it's easier to have like a kind of visual representation about what the style is, as well as of course using literary references. So looking at the very classical white pillars, big statues, that kind of stuff, but we'll look at that in more detail when I look at classical and neoclassical literary things. So Gothic literature was the late 1700s, early 1800s, and it focused on like ruin, decay, death, terror, chaos, all those wonderful things, and it like looked at passion over rationality and reason. So it was in response to the political context, as well as the sociology and psychological context of that time. So with the classicism and Enlightenment, it was kind of like a fantastical pull away from that. So we find often in history in general, when we're looking at movements, and particularly we see it a lot in literature, in literary movements, that there'll be like one extreme, which is very opposite to the next thing that comes along, which is very opposite to the next thing that comes along, and there's always a lot of backing and forthing. So we have like things that are completely opposite, like right next to each other, or sometimes even at the same time, because there will be this one movement and then these other people will be like, I don't like that at all, and go completely against it and react the opposite way to it. So we have a lot of that in literature, and that's really interesting to look at, looking at those, comparing those things, because there is such a huge difference. Anyway, so then we come to Romanticism, which is a great thing to talk about, I find, in literature, which is like this late 1700s all the way to like 1870s. That's Lord Byron, Mary Shelley, so Frankenstein. So that's all that stuff focused on emotion, and like it was a reaction to the 18th century that was all about science and morality and rationality. This was like very against that, so it was like passion and romance and feeling rather than thinking first. Yeah, really emotional stuff rather than the intellectual side of things. And now it's just a quick side note, when you're looking at Romanticism, don't confuse it with German Romanticism. Very different things. German Romanticism is crazy. I'll do a video on that, but it's just insane and we're just going to ignore that. Also, when you're looking at Romanticism, I can understand that it might be confusing. Romanticism is with a capital R. Lowercase Romanticism is like your romantic genre in terms of like, you know, romantic genre when you go to the bookstore. So like the love stories and that kind of stuff. That's romantic with lowercase r. So you can say someone's a romantic writer or something, lowercase r. But Romanticism, and you can say someone's a romantic writer with an uppercase r. It means they're in that Romanticism period. Not even that period, but in that style of writing. And then we come to Victorian era. Now this isn't like this and then it finished and then the next one. You'll find that like so Romanticism finished around 1870 and the Victorian era is like around 1837. So there is a lot of overlap. Sometimes them happen like pretty much at the exact same time. You just have to really look at and what was going on around the time period of the piece that you're either studying or the movement that you're looking at. So then Victorian era came along with obviously Queen Victoria. So 1837 to 1901 was that kind of era. So that's the Bronte sisters, so Charlotte and Emily Bronte, Thomas Hardy. And so that was very Puritan, because like the society was very Puritan. It was like, yeah, it was not on passion at all. It was very much on morality and like doing the right thing by the country, by the Queen. Very proper, like saving face. Class system was like super ingrained, that kind of stuff. So we'll have a look at like specific examples of those things. Yeah, so it's very Puritan, that kind of stuff, and also very religious. So then we have realism, and now that's stuff like Charles Dickens, Konstantin Stanislavski, Anton Chekhov, Henrik Ibsen, that kind of stuff. Notice how I'm mostly doing playwrights. It's just because it's easier to, I guess, identify quickly that whether you're watching a realist play or a non-realist play, because realist plays are very realist. Like it's like you're watching something on TV, like a soap or like even a comedy. As long as you can see that they're real characters, they have real intentions behind their motives, and like it's a lot on psychology and that kind of stuff. So that's what a lot of that realism was, and that's from 1820 to 1920 roughly. Obviously realism still goes on today, so it by no means stops in 1920, but that was just like at its peak. And same with going before 1820 as well. And then you had the Bloomsbury Group from 1903 to 1964, and I'll talk about them in another video. Like with all these movements, I'll talk about them in a separate video. I'll stop saying that now. But the Bloomsbury Group was just a bunch of authors who were knew each other. They're very like the same kind of class, like middle upper class. So it's like E.M. Forster, Virginia Woolf, Lyndon Strachey, that kind of stuff. Those kind of people. Then we had existentialism from the 1850s on, and now this is going to be like a really fun video to talk about because I really love existentialism, and that comes under the theatre form of absurdism, which you might be like, what? But that's a part of existentialism. So existentialism is this big idea. It's not just a literary form. So under that, it's like New Age existentialism was a type of literary form as well as a theatre form, but it was called absurdism, and it had different properties and stuff. And the main person for that was Beckett, not only in the theatre form but with that whole existentialism as well. Samuel Beckett, sorry. So his Waiting for Godot is a big one, Endgame as well. We'll talk about that later. And then we come to modernism, which I love. That's when, with visual representation, when you've got your Monets, Impressionism. So it's T.S. Eliot, Ernest Hemingway, William Faulkner, Great Gatsby, Ezra Pound, and Virginia Woolf. So that's really it's on a lot of like light and colour and that kind of sensory imagery. Modernism is also a lot of stream of consciousness stuff. So if you look at Virginia Woolf stuff, it's very much internal. It's very much looking into the brain of the people, especially if you look at something like The Waves, it is all internal. It's not got very much circumstance. It does have a couple of things, I won't spoil the book, but it's mostly to do with the internal feelings and thoughts of the characters. So it was like 1910 to 1965. Then we have postmodernism, and that's still going on today, and postmodernism is really hard to define. It's got so many different variables. The video for that's probably going to be half an hour, but it's got so many different variables and so many different things that can be classified as postmodernism. In art, it's a lot of mixed media stuff, and like, I mean, Banksy is actually a really good example of postmodernism in terms of artwork. If you don't know who that is, Google. Atonement by Ian McEwan is actually a really good example of looking at all these different literary styles, because basically every chapter is a different style, and a lot of that is to do with that. So the first one for Bryony is the Victorian Puritan, sometimes a little bit Gothic era, and I'll do a video just about Atonement. And then when we've got Cecilia, that's modernism, because she's really into that sensory light, that kind of, all those kind of theories that's behind it. When you look at during the war scene, that's realism. That's very much naturalism as well, where it's like factual, like very detailed. Yeah, so I think that's it, guys. I hope you found this a little bit helpful. As I kept on saying about a billion times, I will make a video on like each one of these, and that will be in this series. I have been away for a while, but I've been to a different country and then I was sick, so I hope you forgive me for that. But yeah, I intend to keep on doing a video at least once a week. And yeah, so I hope you find this helpful. Any questions, comments, books you want me to look at, poems you want me to look at, plays, anything, movements, philosophies, like anything, ideologies, let me know. I'll do my best to research and get back to you. Yeah, so thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you found it helpful, and yeah, let me know what I can do for you to help you. So thanks, bye.